Hello and Assalamu Alaikum. A very warm welcome to all of you on our panel discussion on climate narratives, which aims to weave together the power of storytelling, advocacy, and the imperatives of environmental justice. Climate narratives cover a wide range of stories and perspectives, from scientific accounts, policy appeals, personal testimonies, and fictional tales of lived experience and imagined futures. These are critical tools, for they can either inspire action or delay and disrupt it. I'm Sana Khosa, Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies at the Mushtaq Ahmed Gurmani School of Humanities and Social Sciences. I'm going to be moderating this session today. Before moving to our esteemed panelists tonight, I want to invite our Dean, Dr. Ali Khan, to say a few words.
Thank you, Sana, and a very, very warm welcome to all of you here today. The Gurmani School has been so privileged and extremely happy to have been a partner in this Biennale. Usman Rahim has been such a supporter of the school, and I know he's been instrumental in bringing this event to its fruition. But from a school's point of view, we also feel that it has been essential for academics to contribute to the public discourse. And the more opportunities that are created for this, the better the mutual benefits for us. I'm grateful to all our international partners, particularly Professor Iftikhar Dadi and John Tain, also our national partners for collaborating to ensure the success of this edition of the Biennale. But I'm particularly thankful to those researchers, artists, and other supporters that are based in Pakistan for showcasing their talents and sharing their critical research in the midst of this very apocalyptic environmental landscape that we find ourselves in today. I also believe that this truly uplifting event highlights the point that Pakistan as a nation and as a society needs to start valuing its rich, varied and extensive heritage and culture. And it is events like these that will promote that understanding. I recently read a quote from an artist who was displaying his work in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where they asked this artist, what do you think about artwork and cultural artifacts from India and Pakistan that are now in the Victoria and Albert? And the artist replied, well, at least they are being preserved. And there's no arguing with that. But my point is that Pakistan needs to value its heritage to ensure that we can preserve what is here, including our environment, but also material culture such as films, posters, music, literature, and art. It is difficult to imagine today that Lahore was a city of gardens. Today it stands as the most polluted city in the world. My request to those who have supported us for so long is that to please continue supporting the humanities and the cultural preservation in Pakistan. A country that does not know its culture and heritage is one that has no direction. Pakistan has to stop being seen as a black and white culture. We are not simply about religious extremism and terrorism. There are many other colors to this rainbow. It does not need me to tell you that this climate congress has been or is the need of the hour. It has highlighted some of the diverse research that is ongoing, but it has also shown that much more is needed and that it is needed urgently. Causes, challenges, solutions. But we've also seen how art and literature and poetry can contribute to addressing such critical issues through raising awareness, by creating emotional connections, by reclaiming voices, by challenging worldviews, and by promoting new ways of thinking. This is what the humanities, social sciences, and art can contribute. Again, my deepest gratitude to all our partners, and at LUMS particular, particularly to Dr. Nadra Shahbaz, Dr. Mariam Ibrahim, Dr. Sana Khosa, and all the staff led by Nasiruddin, who have worked day and night to bring these wonderful sessions to you in what are truly apocalyptic times. Thank you to all the participants for making this such a wonderful occasion. I'll stop at that point and hand back to Sana. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. You're always a source of encouragement and support. Your words are highly appreciated. Thank you so much. A little round of thank yous is due from Mariam and myself. So Mariam and I want to thank Dr. Iftikhar Dadi, John Tain, and Farwa Tasadduq for making this collaboration possible, and for Dr. Nadra for breathing life into our otherwise smog-filled corridors with a thought-provoking, beautiful art exhibition. I also want to thank Nasir and Osman for their amazing, fantastic team. It couldn't have been possible without them. They are warriors in this. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So moving on to our esteemed panelists tonight. Today we are joined by experts from diverse disciplines and methods of climate and environmental engagement. Our first panelist, Dr. Saba Pirzadeh, is an associate professor of English at LUMS. She works in the areas of environmental humanities and post-colonial studies, focusing on the literary representation of anthropocentric violence, climate crisis, petro-culture, hydropolitics, and socio-ecological justice. In a predominantly scientific and policy-centric climate framing environment, she fills a gap by studying the climate crisis through different lenses of fictional and non-fictional stories and writings. Please welcome Dr. Saba Pirzadeh.
Thank you, Dr. Sana, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel.
They don't have one.
I'm going to be talking about South Asian fiction today as ecological crime fiction, and looking at the ways that fiction can help us understand climate change in a more immersive and a more nuanced way. South Asian fiction is slowly moving away from established templates and branching into other subgenres to question the historical, political formations of post-colonies. The trope of social interrogation is being used to examine the implications of ecological degradation, since environmental consciousness and nature awareness has permeated popular and commercial fiction. Osama Siddique's novel Snuffing Out the Moon and Amitav Ghosh's novel Gun Island stand out due to their careful consideration of the local and regional implications of destabilizing anthropocentric climate change on human and animal lives. Snuffing Out the Moon consists of 6 separate storylines progressing across 6 eras: Mohenjo-daro, the Mughal Empire under Jahangir, the fall of the Mughal Empire in 1857, Lahore in 2009 during the Lawyers' Movement, and 2084, a future where South Asia is controlled by water conglomerates. It explores themes of religion, morality, savagery, and justice. Gun Island blends mythology and adventure to trace the bookseller Dean's efforts to decode a local legend about a merchant fated to travel the world as he seeks refuge from the snake goddess Manasa Devi. Dean embarks on a global journey spanning from the flooded Sundarban mangroves to the Los Angeles forest fires to a flooded Venice. Despite the differing timelines and locales, both novels interweave history and reality to explore the human and ecological harm generated by anthropogenic climate mutations. In this regard, the term Anthropocene both describes the primacy of human agency in shaping the planet's chemistry, landscape, atmosphere, and changing the functioning of major Earth systems processes. A key challenge is relaying the massive scale and reach of the Anthropocene. Storytelling, fiction, and non-fiction can help us to imaginatively experience the impact of the geophysical force that is the human. Ghosh and Siddique's works relay the risk of the Anthropocene by fusing fictional and non-fictional modes of narration to explore the relationship between climate change and humanity in psychological and social terms, exploring how climate change occurs not just as a meteorological or ecological crisis out there, but as something filtered through our inner and outer lives. In this regard, the essay establishes how Siddique and Ghosh use crime fiction elements of historical retelling, partial detection, and perpetual quest for social justice to generate a critical investigation of the causality and culpability of anthropocentric climate breakdown. Historical retelling foregrounds the narrative relationship at the heart of most crime fiction, namely the relationship between the past and the present. Specifically, both novels work as trans-historical crime fiction since they are characterized by transitions from the present to the past. These novels attain this through the narrative device of framing one story within another story. Snuffing Out the Moon delves into the lives of the denizens of the Mohenjo-daro civilization, which was one of the most advanced human civilizations. The text introduces us to Prakar, a prescient character who carefully observes and interprets nature in his everyday encounters. A major factor behind the success of Mohenjo-daro is attributed to the human attention given to the climate and anticipating and protecting the settlement. Siddique indicates that a cultural shift takes place with the arrival of priests who steadily accrue authority and resort to rituals such as special water puja for placating the weather gods and abating the floods. The inefficacy of this ritual is suggested by Prakar's condemnation of it as idle splashing that will do nothing to curtail the potent threat of flooding, suggesting how pantheism is quickly supplanted by anthropomorphic religion. Moreover, the spectacle of religious ritual gradually diminishes communal willingness to maintain a balance, as indicated by the master architect Mahavil's memory of how the ancestors deliberated over how much to take from the jungle, thereby praising the previous approach of conserving natural resources. This fictional representation is supported by historical studies which confirm that the people of Mohenjo-daro worshipped an Indus goddess who was a universal symbol of life and fertility and had a subsistence economy based on agriculture, hunting, and fishing. As the narrative progresses, though, the text indicates the oncoming demise of the civilization. Mahavil looked at Prakar with an expression of the deepest sadness. The rains aren't letting up, and neither are the floods. Only a fool would deny that we are entering a very wet epoch. And yet we have been sitting around and doing nothing about it, end quote. This dialogue indicates the rupture in human nature kinship which results in the civilization's demise, as indicated by the narrative depiction of Mohenjo-daro's destruction by floods, a conclusion also reached by some archaeologists. Thus, Siddique's narrative represents history eco-critically to convey the potent dangers of estrangement from nature, one temporally extended by Ghosh to the contemporary age, or to that of the Anthropocene. This concept is framed mythically in Ghosh's novel, which begins with the introduction of a local Indian legend that propels Dean's journey across the world. It is the legend of a merchant who is said to have fled overseas in order to escape persecution of Manasa Devi, the goddess who rules over snakes and all other poisonous creatures. This casual reference piques Dean's interest in traveling back to the Sundarbans, which are an extensive mangrove delta around 3,000 miles extended from northeastern India to southern Bangladesh to explore the origins of the myth. This fictional element also has a factual component as attested by historical accounts of the legend's popularity, whereby the deity is worshipped in Bengal and its neighboring regions for her ability to cure chronic diseases and to bestow fertility. Upon arrival in the Sundarbans, Dean discovers the myths to be part of the everyday vernacular and belief system such that local people have built multiple shrines to pay homage to the Devi. This religious devoutness is seen as a necessary prerequisite to ward off harm and misfortune, such that any defiance to Devi is seen as an invitation to her wrath, as reflected in the outcomes of the merchant's refusal to become her devotee. Intrigued by the quasi-factual basis of the legend, Dean embarks on a transcontinental journey to uncover the gun merchant story. It is through this journey that Dean witnesses the violent assault of climate destabilization, such as extreme weather fluctuations, floods, mass animal deaths, insect invasions, which then also becomes the metaphorical signification of the deadly effects of the human control over nature. This is similar to Devi's legend that warned about the cursed existence of humans who refuse to yield to nature. Thus, Ghosh deftly uses myth as a parable and as a warning against abuse of nature within the Anthropocene. Both writers use history and folklore then to highlight human nature interdependence such that the texts become noir folk narratives in which social diatribes are replaced by archetypal folkloric motifs. In this context, the historical retelling of the Mohenjo-daro civilization and the Devi legend are used to convey grave warnings against the human instrumentalization of nature. By giving the natural world itself agency and identity and complexity to provide an antidote to the anthropocentrism that might have been said to motivate, perpetuate, and aggravate the ecological crisis of our time.
No.
The motif of historical retelling becomes a narrative device for climate change detection by the primary characters within the novel, Afaki and Dean. They're both cast in the role of detectives who, in contrast to the traditional detective role of investigating murdered bodies, are charged with the role of examining bodies of historical and experiential knowledge countering climate cataclysms. Snuffing out the moon extends the water metaphor counter-chronologically to 2084 CE, which is futuristic South Asia, whereby water surplus has been converted into scarcity. In 2084 CE, there now exists a new global order, whereby the nation-state system has been dismantled and replaced by the rule of conglomerates that retain power through their control over natural resources, specifically water. The regime maintains its biopolitical power through control of information, such that there is a strict censorship of oral or written discourse about the past. In this context, the academic Afaki assumes the role of the detective as he reclaims archives that trace the conglomerate's rise to power. These archives state that, quote, after the conflicts, meltdowns, and disintegration of the area formerly known as South Asia, the anarchic situation was exacerbated by intense climate changes, end quote. In this war, the conglomerates emerged victorious through the ruthless deployment of new age weapons and techniques of mass rationalization. Afaki's detection exposes and critiques the political deployment of disaster capitalism, wherein structural vulnerability is exacerbated through disasters and subsequently leveraged to deepen coloniality. This fictional detection also mirrors, therefore, our current suicidal relation to nature, whereby climatologists predict that global warming will accelerate the shrinkage of drinkable water resources as well as intensify droughts in arid and semi-arid regions in the world. In narrativizing this phenomena, Siddiq seems to critique the current nation-state's lack of reaction to climate change, not to dispassionately abandon human life to the reality of its coming extinction, but to deploy narrative to affirm the continuing value of human life. Likewise, Ghosh's novel uses the travel trope to give Deen an acute insight into the ground-level realities of living amidst socioeconomic destabilization caused by climate change. It is through interactions with the locals that Deen learns about the everyday devastation caused by climate upheaval, such as the growing deprivation of subsistence-based survival for the Sundarban fishermen. Quote, when people try to dig wells and arsenic-laced brew gushed out of the soil, when they tried to shore up embankments, the tides rose higher and pulled them down again. These poignant lines allow us to see the ways that the most marginalized people are further threatened by a sentient nature that has been repeatedly used and abused by anthropogenic activities. Moving from the Sundarbans to other continents, Deen continues to detect, note, and reflect on the unfolding of climate catalysms across different geographies and countries. He witnesses Los Angeles forests being ravaged by wildfires, learns that floods occur regularly in Venice, and is nearly killed by a massive tornado in Venice. The temporal juxtaposition and bodily detection of these climate disasters enables Deen to detect and convey how the uncanny events of anthropogenic derangement have become an ordinary occurrence. And though Deen's detection doesn't conclude on an all-explanatory note, it is effective in conveying the chaotic ground-level realities of a contemporary risk society characterized by the unintended consequences of modernity, such as climate change risks, which have become both inescapable for both developing and developed countries. Thus, both characters offer a partial detection of bodily and experiential knowledge of the socio-economic implications of the Anthropocene to underscore how power and authority can be investigated through the magnifying glass of other knowledges, against the local or global mainstream or against potential projections of a dominant group and neo-imperial West. Adding to the affective dimensions of detection is the narrativization of the precarious plight of climate victims, indicating social justice to be an important characteristic of post-colonial crime fiction. In Siddique's novel, the quest entails the reinscription of new subject positions for the previously oppressed. In Snuffing Out the Moon, the textual encounter between a conglomerate pilot Faruqi and the regressives opens up communication between two supposedly antagonistic factions. Faruqi is told how with the advent of water wars, quote, children, women, and men had gone forth in caravans, clinging together for fear of persecution, in dire need of water and security, end quote. Furthermore, Faruqi is informed that after the stabilization of global power, the conglomerates did not see any incentive to rule the indigenous population and instead became driven by the imperative to destroy or cast out people to wastelands. These lines reveal how the empire subjugated indigenous people to spatial dispossession, bodily harm, and militaristic violence in pursuit of ecological capital accumulation. Faruqi's narrative arc thus becomes an important counter to the misframing of indigenous peoples and underlines the necessity to integrate the perspectives of the marginalized and transnational groups. Facilitating human connectivity across different groups, not least through narrative, could inspire collective action for socio-environmental justice. In Gun Island, the quest for justice entails environmental witnessing, which makes readers see and understand the trauma inflicted on non-human species, specifically aquatic creatures. Ghost charts the affective and psychological dimensions of habitat modification by global warming through the example of the Sundarban dolphins. Rising sea levels have made their familiar waterways too saline, forcing the dolphins to seek new paths by venturing further upriver into populated, heavily fished areas where they can be snared by fishermen's nets and get hit by motorboats. The text also invites readers to consider the dolphin's cognition in the face of such alarming ecological changes. Through the perspective of Pia, a marine scientist who senses that this habitat alteration will hit Rani, a matriarch dolphin, the hardest. Pia recounts how Rani, quote, must have felt that everything she knew, everything she was familiar with, the water, the currents, the earth itself, was rising up against her. We're in a new world now. No one knows where they belong anymore, neither human nor animals. This close attention to Rani's interiority allows readers to feel her acute psychological pain at the unrecognizable transformation of a natural environment, and in turn makes Rani a metonym for all life displaced and dispossessed because of climate disruptions. In addition to the psychological trauma, the text also depicts the corporeal trauma inflicted upon animals, whereby the rapid poisoning of natural spaces due to industrial pollution and effluent discharges creating oceanic dead zones over tens of thousands of squares of miles of ocean. Thus, a generic concern with social justice that we find in post-colonial crime fiction is extended by Ghosh to encompass an insistence on interspecies justice in the face of the Anthropocene. Through a careful mapping of habitat rupture, behavior modification, and corporeal violence inflicted on animals because of anthropogenic activities, Ghosh encourages readers to feel the trauma of persecuted animals, to advocate justice and responsibility for the well-being of these animals and other life forms. An eco-critical examination of both novels establishes the writer's use of crime fiction elements to investigate the causes of and culpability for climate breakdown. These authors expand the conventional notions of climate as statistical data. They instead denote its importance as a material phenomena wherein climate is omnipresent in the history of cultures, as a condition and product of life, as responsible for and a threat to human existence, thereby highlighting in turn the destabilizing impact of human processes on the Earth's ecosystems. In doing so, the works chosen highlight how fiction must account for crimes that are at the same time incalculable and urgently in need of recognition, and how we might turn to literature to help us avoid becoming spectators of our own demise. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Saba, for this fascinating and engaging display of eco-critical analysis. Thank you so much. All right, so our next speaker, esteemed speaker here is Dr. Ahmed Rafay Alam. He's our second panelist and is an acclaimed and accomplished environmental lawyer and activist. In 2013, he co-founded Salim Alam and Company, a firm that specializes in energy, water, natural resources, and urban infrastructure. Ahmed Rafay is an advisor for federal and provincial government in Pakistan, the World Bank, ADB, IFC, and a number of international NGOs. He currently serves as an active member on a number of councils and committees, including Pakistan Climate Change Council, the Punjab Environmental Protection Council, and the much-needed Air Quality Asia. He teaches climate change policy and environmental law at LUMS, and he has also written a constitutional history of water in Pakistan. Well, please welcome Mr. Rafay Alam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It's I'm thrilled to be here and for this talk as well. A lot of it has to do with Amitav Ghosh's work, with the Great Derangement, where he sort of asked the question, what happens if, because of the climate catastrophe, human civilization comes to an end, and a few centuries from now, some aliens decide to do some, cheap vulture tourism of a recently deceased civilization. Well, they'd come to town, like we also go to, say, Rome and check out the Colosseum to see what they used to live like and things like that. But if aliens were to come to Earth and turn on our television right now or read our newspapers tomorrow morning, they'd be forced to the conclusion that we had no idea that the climate crisis was coming to hit us. That is the Great Derangement. And it's meant a lot to my work since then, because one of the things he talks about how this happened is an accident or a result of modernity. Because if you go back not too long ago, it's less than 2 centuries ago, you'll be hard-pressed to find a story or narrative of human beings on Earth that isn't sort of inextricably linked with its environment. stories of Europe involved forests. Almost all the Punjabi poetry here involves a riverbank somewhere. These things were part of us and the discussion we had about our stories. It was woven in together. And now with modernity, it's very different because of the focus we have on individual agency of the person and the story they tell of their lives. It seems that the environment is now the backdrop against which the stories and the dominant discourse of human beings is now being told. And this is the derangement. You ask kids where milk comes from, they'll say it comes from the refrigerator. It's a disconnect that needs to be addressed through bringing these stories back into the mainstream, putting climate change, environment into the discussion on art, into the discussion in literature that we have, in the discussion we have of our lives. It's only then that it will give meaning, be given the meaning and depth and importance it needs for this transformative change to take place. This is a photograph of protesters in 2019 manning a climate strike here in Lahore with thousands of other people in Lahore, in Karachi, in Islamabad, and in 35 different cities throughout Pakistan on the same day, September 19th, 2019. I was surprised at the amount of young people who are very close to this subject, who talk about, whose future depends on our civilization. Well, I want to be brief and as quick as I can. Let's see if I can't go to the next. All right. Now, we all know that greenhouse gases cause climate change. They heat the sun's temperature, they heat the sun, they heat up the Earth's atmosphere and cause global warming. We know that. And we know that that greenhouse gases are produced, amongst other things, when we take things out of the ground and burn them for our energy and transport needs, whether it's wood, whether it's gas, whether it's oil, whether it's diesel, whether it's coal. It's a fossil fuel. When you dig it out and you burn it, it will produce a greenhouse gas that will warm the earth. That, and of course agriculture and industrial farming of animals will also produce things like methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. But we know this is the science of it all. But what I want to say is that the reason this is important and for us is because these increased greenhouse gases have thrown the Earth's ecological balance off. A balance that we as a species on Earth have enjoyed since the last ice age. This stability of the Earth's ecosystem over the last, what does it say here, 8,000, 10,000, 12,000 years, has given the human species the remarkable opportunity to do things like domesticate the ox and the horse, and to invent the wheel, and to domesticate that breed of what is it, grass that's called wheat, to produce things like agriculture. Once you could domesticate the ox, you invented the plow and the wheel, and you knew how to grow wheat. You had enough food for people no longer to be scavenging and to be able to support a civilization, a human civilization. It is this ecological balance that has supported a human civilization on Earth since then. And because this ecological balance is out of kilter, human civilization as we know it, whether you like it or not, it cannot subsist anymore. It is over. We do not have that stability and the weather reliability to be able to produce the food necessary to enjoy coffee in the morning here in Pakistan. We might not become extinct, but this type of civilization is over and will have to be replaced. Now, I also mentioned that a lot of times when I'm talking about this, that climate change isn't really a problem. It's the symptom of something much worse. It's a symptom of human civilization over-consuming this planet's ability to replenish itself. An overconsumption and overdrive that's driven, I believe, amongst other things, by capitalism. A system of economics that allows you to unaccountably exploit natural resources and to abuse human labor, to create pockets of profit and rich people around the world, and consequently poverty elsewhere. As long as you can post a profit, no one asks about the type of crimes you're committing. The last US presidential election should prove that for us. The story of imperialism and colonialism is just that: large-scale extractions of wealth from one part of the world, abuse of the environment and the people over there, so that a few bunch of countries in the global north can become immeasurably wealthy. the decision of having, well, the idea that men are the center of all decision making creates a systemic discrimination against women called the patriarchy. And you can't have adaptive solutions to a climate crisis. You can't have successful mitigatory solutions to the climate crisis without women participating in this decision making. You know, we've got a national disaster, a provincial and a district disaster management authority that when the 2022 floods came, were pretty quick off their feet to get some tents to people in Sindh and Balochistan. But because those agencies are all male, there wasn't any natal care or feminine hygiene available for the many tens of thousands of female victims of the floods as well. Because you don't have that capacity in yourself unless women are part of decision making. Anyway, these are the drivers of the climate crisis, this overconsumption. And the climate crisis is a symptom of this sickness. I want to show you how it plays out in places like Pakistan. But first, in order to counter the climate crisis, the international community got together in 1992 and signed off on something called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The objective to which, over here, underlined in the middle, is the stabilization of greenhouse gases. That's the objective of this, one of the most important legal documents, international legal documents signed in recent memory. And the way this document works is it sets out common but differentiated responsibilities amongst member states, where more developed countries have the responsibility to mitigate greenhouse gases, to provide climate finance to less developed economies so that they may use that finance to prepare and adapt for climate change. That's how this legal system is designed. That's the architecture of this legal system. And finance is important because in 2010 in Cancun, the G20 countries got together and said that they were going to raise climate finance for less developed countries to $100 billion by 2020. And also in Sharm el-Sheikh, when the Conference of Parties under the UNFCCC met in 2022, they decided to set up a loss and damage fund. Again, money to countries that need to put their economies back on their feet once they've been devastated by a climate catastrophe. Well, there's been no mitigation. We have produced more greenhouse gases on Earth since the signing of the UNFCCC than in all of human history before that. There's no stabilization. You look at the projections of where temperatures are going to be going in the next 15, 20, 30 years. It's nowhere but up because the promises of the global north have been broken. Let alone that, the pledge of having $100 billion in a climate fund by 2020 is today capitalized at no more than $13 billion. So there's no money either. There's a broken promise of the global north, and these things have consequences. When you don't mitigate your greenhouse gases, you get things like this. This is Sindh and Balochistan in 2021 and in the summer of 2022, when catastrophic rain-based floods created a 100-kilometer lake in these areas, and overall in Pakistan displaced about 30 million people. There's an apportionment study, a source study conducted by Imperial College London the same year, that found that about 50% of the intensity of these rains, and we're talking 400 to 800% of average rainfall falling in a matter of days in the months of September and August of 2022, that 50% of the intensity of this rainfall was on account of the 1 degree centigrade global warming the Earth has experienced since the Industrial Revolution. Pakistanis did not face that flood. That was not a natural calamity. That was a consequence of man-made climate change, of the broken promises of mitigation from global north countries. And of course, lack of finance for Pakistan to prepare for such a thing. Although how you can adapt to a 100-kilometer lake is beyond me. The World Bank estimated that the 2022 floods cost Pakistan, in terms of infrastructure loss, somewhere in the region of $34 billion. Just to give you a sense of scale over here, the Loss and Damage Fund that the United Nations has capitalized or announced after COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh so far only has $700 million in it. And I'll point out the United States of America, just for context, has provided $17 million in the Loss and Damage Fund. And compare that now for a second. Remember a couple of years ago when Notre Dame's roof burnt down? Well, Notre Dame got over $1 billion in donations within a matter of weeks. And I'll remind you that just this April, the US Congress voted in excess of $90 billion for war and genocide in Ukraine and in Israel. So there are broken promises of mitigation. There's absolutely no finance. Countries like Pakistan and Pakistanis across the board in global south are suffering because of the climate crisis. Yet there's money for war. It should fill one with that sense of injustice and rage that should be part of the discourse of our everyday lives rather than an abstract playing out in the background. Well, they're rain-based floods. They're also unseasonal floods, like 2 days of rain in Karachi in January, which shut the city down for 3 days. People couldn't get to work, 16 grid stations collapsed. This is the financial capital of the country. But it doesn't just rain in Karachi, it rains up north as well. These are called glacier lake outburst floods. They're very sudden, they're unexpected, and they're devastating. Along with extra rain, we have heat waves and droughts, which are costing farmer livelihoods and driving farmers into poverty and also creating food security issues in Pakistan. That heat also translates up to the Hindu Kush, Karakoram and Himalayan mountain ranges, where just between 2023 and 24 you can see that there's no ice in the mountains. This is January 23, this is January 24. It's getting too hot for ice to stay on the mountains, and this means huge water shortages in all of South Asia and China, and food security related issues as well, not to mention the imminent devastation of the culture and people who live here. Heat waves have hit us. There were hundreds of people who died in Karachi because of what we call the South Asian Heat Wave 2024. But again, 10 years ago in Karachi, there was a week-long heat wave that claimed over 1,000 people. And then, of course, there's this, what we call Lahore smog. I'm surprised that we still think that this is a Lahore problem and it's a seasonal problem. This is very much a year-long regional public health emergency, which is killing us, because I don't have to labor this point on very more. And again, this is not abstract, because just this year in January, several hundred children in Punjab and over 50 in Lahore died of pneumonia, exacerbated by air pollution. These are not sort of abstract thoughts of things that are going to happen. This is happening to us now. And what I am also told, the other vulnerability Pakistan has to climate change is bad governance. Because in these circumstances, when you see the air pollution caused by the transport sector on our roads, it's kind of galling to see that the only major urban infrastructure being done right now in Lahore is overpasses and underpasses and converting 100,000 acres of agricultural land over the Ravi into a housing estate. It's kind of galling that the only big development in Karachi is the Malir Highway. It's kind of galling that the Prime Minister of Pakistan just 2 days ago launched or inaugurated the Serena underpass over in Islamabad. Huge amounts of money. And you know, when you talk about money being spent, is it being spent for resilience or adaptation? No, it's being spent so that bureaucrats can have field cars to go on field visits, both here in Punjab and in Sindh. And in the September of 2022, when 30 million Pakistanis were impacted by floods, 10 million displaced, the Pakistani army placed a $450 million order of fighter jets from the United States. This is the type of governance we're dealing with as well. So climate change in Pakistan is not just a consequence of greenhouse gases emitted by the global north, but the failure of our governments and our process to be able to provide a remedy for its people. Around the world, this is Valencia in Spain. Spain just suffered the worst ecological disaster in its history last week, with rain making one of the rivers near the city of Valencia flood and killing hundreds of people overnight. But you know, in 2023, a wind swept over the Libyan city of Derna, broke 2 dams and killed estimated 10,000 people in one night. 800 million animals died in the fires that took place in Australia between December 2019 and January 2020. And yet at the same time, and this is what capitalism galls me, the very companies responsible for the climate crisis, the ones profiting from or making these fossil fuels, are making immense amounts of money. Shell could have paid for all of Pakistan's damage in the 2020 floods with just 1 year's profit, which is of course nothing compared to the 161 billion that Saudi Aramco posted. Congratulations, they've opened their first petrol station in Pakistan. Meanwhile, our consumptive habits, especially of the rich, far dwarf the consumptive habits of the poor. And I often hear that climate change is caused by population in Pakistan. Please don't take this This is actually, it's incorrect, it's borderline racist. It's the living habits of the extremely rich, even in poor countries. Because, for example, our climate footprint in this room rivals that of any academic place anywhere in the Western world. We are just as responsible because of our habits, because we're more affluent. Our carbon footprints are much, much more than those of the global South and poor people in the global South. So these are some thoughts. I'm sorry it wasn't very structured, but it all came from Amitav Ghosh's book. And what I was trying to do here is to provide a sense and context of climate justice and the need to have these stories told. The Biennale is one of those mechanisms. I think John, Kudsia, the team have done a fantastic job bringing in so many people from around the world to be able to tell their stories and also tell Lahore's story. And it's tragic. If you go outside, it's very sad. But it's events like these, the interaction that I hope all of you and many more will have and have had with the art in Lahore in the last month, will make you stop and think and realize these aren't just scientific words. These aren't just abstract thoughts. These aren't just things that are happening in international conferences elsewhere. This is part of our life. And it's part of our life. I can draw about it. I can write a story about it. It's part of who I am. It's part of the language that I speak and of my humanity. And with that, I will stop with this photograph from Susana Vera. She's a Spanish photographer. She took this last year. It's a bunch of Spanish academics, scientists, being carried away because they were having a climate protest. As we see around the world, there is increasing clampdowns on freedom of liberties, freedom of speech, not just in terms of climate change, but also in terms of how you can criticize the genocide and the Zionist state of Israel. The climate crisis, in order to be resolved at some level, it depends on international law and the international community. You know, you're not going to get global greenhouse gas mitigation unless international law works and the international community agrees to do something. Climate change and the significant amount of damage and life that increasing temperatures are going to cause is a sort of genocide of the human civilization, caused in part by the profits made by these very few companies in a very few number of countries. If the international law set up by the United Nations can't deal with the genocide in Gaza, it doesn't have a hope in hell to do anything with climate change. And so if you look at it this way, every problem is tied in with this. There are ecological devastations that are taking place in Gaza and the West Bank because of the war. It is very much tied into the conversations we have about climate change because this is about our future. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Rafay, for your extremely mesmerizing yet frightening presentation. We really appreciate your climate activism and creating this need for urgency for climate action. Thank you so much. Our third and final panelist, Dr. Fazilda Nabeel, is a climate and water governance expert, serving as an advisor for the government of Pakistan's and United Nations Living Indus Initiative for the ecological restoration of the Indus Basin in Pakistan. She also teaches courses on climate change and environmental studies here at LUMS. Her research focuses on the political ecology of climate and environmental governance, exploring the historical evolution of groundwater non-governance in the Indus Basin of Pakistan from the colonial to the contemporary period. Her recent consultancy work includes Pakistan's transboundary water issues, the political economy of water governance, the efficiency and equity implications of nature-based solutions, and climate and water justice. Thank you so much, Fazilda, for being here.
Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. I'm after the two stellar talks by Saba and Rafay. I'm going to try and sort of talk from and try and connect the whole narratives, the future of climate, as well as climate justice from a practitioner's perspective. I work at the intersection of academia and policy, mostly leaning towards policy research. So I'm going to try and bring in the practitioner's perspective from based on my learnings from working on Pakistan's climate plan, the Living Indus Initiative with the United Nations and with the Ministry of Climate Change. So, and apologies for my cough. It's one of the gifts of being in Lahore at this time of the year. So today I want to be able to discuss what about climate justice within, and what really prompted this this stream of research that is ongoing, and I'm going to be presenting some preliminary findings. We're still conducting interviews, and we're taking this forward, but some preliminary findings and mostly questions. Questions appropriate to sort of end this session with, questions that focus on environmental justice, questions that raise concerns about climate justice. So the whole narrative and the whole discourse around, Rafay touched upon it as well, the Loss and Damage Fund being a big win for developing countries like Pakistan, particularly Pakistan, both at the announcement of the fund, as far as the announcement of the fund at COP27 was concerned, as well as the formalization of the fund at COP28 last year. This was touted as the big win for Pakistan, notwithstanding the issues that come with the mechanism of dispersing the funds, as Rafay has pointed out, and the fact that the magnitude of the fund is too small relative to needs of the developing countries. The Loss and Damage Fund was touted as a big win for climate justice between countries, and Pakistan has been right in pursuing and in raising concerns about climate justice as it takes place between countries. But then missing from this entire discourse on global climate justice is the discourse or the questions on climate justice within Pakistan. We know that high-level loss and damage fund conversations are really vastly disconnected from the experience of people confronting environmental disasters and climate disasters such as the apocalyptic 2022 floods. We also know that farmers, for instance, who lost their lives, who lost their lives and who lost their livelihoods and their lands in the floods or in other environmental climate disasters, know nothing about the Loss and Damage Fund, and most likely it means little to them. So first, what do we mean very quickly when we talk about climate justice? Three aspects that we're looking for, that we're analyzing with particular reference to not just the national and provincial, provincial and district policies and plans by the government of Pakistan as well as the provincial governments. So very quickly, distributive justice is simply that some communities bear the brunt of climate change more than others. Relational justice talks about inclusion of these impacted communities in the decision-making process. So are the impacted communities included in, for instance, the Climate Change Council, other authorities that navigate the decision-making on, for instance, the National Adaptation Plan or the National Climate Change, or implementing the National Climate Change Policy. And finally, recognitional, which is really looking at the interaction between climate change and other existing inequalities. So with these aspects of climate justice in mind, I wanted to raise questions starting with how has the issue of climate justice, if at all, been dealt with in national, provincial, district policies, climate action plans? what about programs that stem from these climate action, from these policies and plans, programs that are being implemented on ground? And then be able to understand and be able to go on from there to see that as we move from policies, these high-level policies, to implementation plans and to programs on ground, where are we going? Is there hope for the common people? Is there hope for you and me as citizens of this country? My apologies. So the last decade has seen many policies and plans, starting off with National Climate Change Policy, the National Adaptation Plan, which has come up very recently, the Provincial Climate Change Policy. Each of the provinces now has, with the most recent addition being Balochistan, each of the provinces now has a climate change policy, and then various others, not just in the climate space, but in the water space. We've had 2 of the provinces come up with, Punjab and KP, with recent water acts. We've had various integrated water resource management policies. We've had, energy policies. The last decade particularly has seen too many policies and action plans, both at the national and then of course trickling down to the provincial level. My question today, and what I tackle in my presentation to some extent, what I start to explore really, is to what extent do these action plans incorporate questions of justice and equity and equality. And I argue that most of Pakistan's climate action plans at the national, provincial, and now increasingly at the district level, we're formulating those as we speak under cascading the NAP to provinces and districts. Most of the climate action plans demonstrate a superficial understanding of inequities, socioeconomic inequities, and climate justice, if at all. And the references to climate justice and environmental justice is merely symbolic. Let's start with the National Climate Change Policy. There is, as with any policy, there's definitely a section on poverty, there's a section on gender, it talks about livelihoods, it talks about pro-poor, gender-sensitive adaptation, and in a very checkbox, manner. And so it does outline these broad goals and these progressive ideas, but lacks the mechanisms and the resources and the local partnerships that are needed to materialize, that are needed to achieve these goals on ground. Moving on, Pakistan's nationally determined contributions document, the NDC document 2021. As we speak, the 2024 document is being formulated by UNDP in preparation for the COP, upcoming COP next week. Going by the 2021 document, that was the latest available. It also talks about, it has a very strong pro-poor rhetoric, also talks about human costs, climate insurance products, livelihoods, the emphasis on livelihoods, the emphasis on poverty, the emphasis on gender. Latest edition, and something that was championed by UNEP support in Pakistan, the National Adaptation Plan.
Can you please tell me the definition of
a lot of broad strategic principles. Two of those I want to highlight. There's first one on the right, leave no one behind, and then addressing inequity. Right, it's 2 of the 10 guiding principles for National Adaptation Plan. But the National Adaptation Plan, like other policy documents, sets these broad strategic goals. without the necessary complementary infrastructure, policy infrastructure to realize them. Very recently, Rafay and I were both in the Punjab climate change policy consultations. It does a very good job, at least tackling issues of climate justice, social justice on paper. And the vision for a climate resilient Punjab mentions climate justice as one of the 10 guiding principles. So very clear focus on social justice, climate justice, but to what end, we're yet to find out. Sindh climate change policy again mentions clubs, women, youth, marginalized communities, sets out strategic policies, priorities and objectives, and the institutions responsible or not for undertaking or for implementing these. Similar is the case with KP climate change policy. Again, a very checkbox treatment of vulnerable groups, clubbing, poverty, gender, marginalized people, youth, under one theme. So the rhetoric is strong across these policies and plans. The Balochistan climate change policy, also you'd see similar themes coming in: environmental justice, gender, social inclusion, poverty. You see all of that sprinkled across policy documents, almost like a formula. And as we see in much of the development work that ends up being a part of policy. So preliminary analysis indicates that the language of equity, justice, vulnerability, marginalized groups, women, climate justice, social justice has made it to the government of Pakistan's and the provincial government's policies and plans. The government is supporting these progressive ideals. What we need to question and what we need to understand is this merely symbolic? There is a very strong rhetoric, but it comes with a lack of follow-through. The documentary analysis is going to be supplemented by interviews and to sort of triangulate the findings and present them more holistically. Moving on from policies to actual initiatives on ground. Like I said, I'm a part of the team that works on and that advises on Living Indus, conceptualized by Dr. Adil Najam. It's an initiative, it's an umbrella initiative, it supports nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions essentially entail working with nature rather than against them. To give you an example, nature-based solutions are wetlands, natural wetlands, artificial constructed wetlands. They're nature-based solutions. So if you think of forests as nature's lungs, where you could think of wetlands as nature's kidneys. So it's, for instance, wetlands have the potential to sequester or to remove up to 90% of nitrogen and phosphorus, phosphates from wastewater. Wetlands also have an enormous flood protection potential, where as a nature-based solution, an acre worth of wetland can absorb up to 1.5 million gallons of flood water. So the idea is to advance very innovative solutions. So the Living Indus initiative has, it's still in the works when it comes to implementation. It's currently in the stage where it's getting, it's pitching for climate finance. But a very quick look at some of the other policies and programs. The 10 billion tree tsunami, internationally highlighted and celebrated as a success story. There has been, so some of the reviews of the program do suggest that the trees that were planted, there was an overwhelming emphasis on numbers. The trees that were planted were monocultures. Some colleagues and friends at WWF have been working to reverse that with the KP Forest Department, working to correct that. Again, some of the main initiatives, the Clean Green Pakistan program, focuses on solid waste management, clean cities, and urban cities. The initiative has been criticized for a lot of emphasis on mere symbolism and photo ops rather than actual concrete actions taking place on ground. Similarly, the Delta Blue Carbon Project, again an example of a nature-based solution which works with mangrove reforestation. And mangroves have an enormous potential to sequester carbon. The mangroves ecosystem in Sindh is the 7th largest arid mangrove ecosystem in the world and has the potential to sequester about 76.4 million tons of carbon. So a great, in terms of the concept, in terms of the idea, a great project to begin with. And a great project by the government of Sindh. In terms of its implementation, for instance, some of the reports suggest that the fisherfolk, which are one of the key beneficiaries from the mangrove project, were not consulted, right? So how well, the aim of highlighting all of these programs that are in implementation, many of these are from the NDC, the aim of highlighting all of them is how well are our policies and programs incorporating voices of people that most directly and most severely impacted by climate change. Again, some of the policies and programs emphasizing nature-based solutions in the NDC. Nature-based solutions also don't come without, their problems. A lot of the research is still ongoing. A lot of these nature-based solutions are being implemented as pilots in Pakistan. There's monitoring and evaluation frameworks are not, they're not concrete. They're still in the making. IUCN has some global standards on NBS, and Pakistan is developing a toolkit, but these solutions are fuzzy, or at least as great as they sound and as low cost, and they want to engage the communities and have community buy-in, but it's not as easy as going and identifying a brick and mortar dam, right? So a lot of work still needed in the nature-based solutions bit. So I know I'm short on time. I think I want to, raise one last question and then end with something hopeful, something, that's going to, give us a ray of hope as we exit the room. So Pakistan this year is taking its carbon markets to COP29. This is also something that we ought to think about. What is these, carbon markets have all sorts of problems with regards to standards, with regards to buyers, with regards to sellers, equity implications as far as voluntary carbon markets are concerned. And we need to be wary of where we're going with this, not just with regards to this bringing in climate finance for the country, but how is that money going to trickle down? One of the things that the Living Indus Initiative, for instance, advocates is engaging. As Rafay and Saba both talked about, youth engagement, bringing back the climate narrative to the forefront. One of the things that, an encouraging story from South Punjab, School Education Department in South Punjab, has been implemented, something called the Sabz Kitab or the Green Book. This is a supplementary text that has been introduced by Dr. Ehtesham, who is the district commissioner in South Punjab, Bhavalpur at the time. As hard as it was for him to do this, he was able to introduce a text in the form of a story to 7th grade students. So this is a book that has about 14 chapters. It's a supplementary text and doesn't just teach secondary level students the letter or the concept of climate change, but has gone one step further, engaging them in planting Mewaki forests within the schools. So there are about 186 Miyawaki forests or urban forests across the districts that Dr. Ehtesham has worked in. So an encouraging initiative, particularly from the point of view of engaging youth, which form about 65% of our population, we need and there's need to do this going forward. So as we move from the climate plans, the abstract, high level, our global commitments under the NDC, provincial, now as we speak, we're making district adaptation plans. So as we move, as all of these plans cascade from global to national to provincial, district, and on ground in the form of programs, one of the things that should make it to the discourse, or some of the questions that we should be asking are questions about climate justice, questions about procedural justice, questions about relational justice, and that's what I wanted to highlight today. Thank you.